The Polar Express is a book I remember growing up with back in elementary school, and numerous years later received a movie adaptation by Back to the Future director Robert Zemeckis. I've watched this movie several times with my 3-year-old daughter who loves it, and honestly, I find it to be a great Christmas movie as well. It was then that it dawned on me that there's no better time to review the Polar Express GameCube game that is based on the movie. So, does the game capture the spirit of Christmas in the way the book and film does? Or is it the equivalent of receiving a lump of coal for Christmas? Let's find out. The Polar Express game takes place around the events of the film, in which you play as a little boy who wants to believe in Christmas. On Christmas Eve night, he hears a train come out of nowhere and appear in front of his house. The conductor tells the boy that the train is called the Polar Express and is heading straight for the North Pole. The game uses clips from the movie itself to segue between levels, but also takes its own liberties by having certain events unfold differently in the game. For example, Scrooge is one of the main antagonists on the Polar Express train itself, and is the main reason for why many of the hiccups occurring along the train ride are happening. The story does have most of the voice actors, except for Tom Hanks' voice for the conductor during the in-game cutscenes. His voice is still intact though for moments where the movie clip plays. While the story in the movie was far more stretched out from the book, the game will provide another unique way of telling the story. While I won't say that the story is amazingly told here, it gets the job done. The movie itself, however, is still the way I'd experienced this as a whole. Now, what about the gameplay? Well, the Polar Express is a platformer at its core, but tries to have a variety of minigames and mechanics to try keeping the experience engaging for younger audiences. You will start off by trying to find golden tickets that went missing from several of the kids on the train. Finding tickets won't be just simply running through the train to get them though, but instead relies on minigames. The little boy can't actually attack objects that stand in his way unless provided a certain means through a minigame. For example, one method has you using this ice crusher device in what is essentially a game of asteroids, but with ice blocks. Here you just destroy any of the blocks in the way and get it down to the smallest piece possible so you can get either a golden ticket or other items. Another are scenes where you'll have to throw objects at the Scrooge in the Box toys that are trying to hurt you. Controls are incredibly simple, with the A button allowing you to jump and double jump, the B button being your interact button, the X button for crouching, and the R button allowing you to switch the camera 180 degrees when on the train. Combat, which is basically just throwing or kicking objects at enemies, will provide an auto lock-on and show you a green trajectory if you're going to hit the enemy and a red trajectory if you're going to miss. The mechanics here are quite basic, but again, it makes sense given that the game is meant for younger audiences.
Here it comes!
Now, I mentioned the game relies on minigames for most of its gameplay, but I don't mean that in a way where it's like Mario Party minigames. Rather, just various game mechanics blended in to provide variety. There are scenes where you'll do quick time rhythm events, and these... yeah, these are pretty bad.
Up! Left! Right! Roll!
Up! Left! Right! Spin!
There is also a moment where you are skiing down a mountain to catch back up with the Polar Express and get to the front of the train as quick as possible. Granted, this scene is quite different from the movie, but it works well as an alternative for the game's sake. There's also a scene that tries to go Metal Gear Solid with stealth, where you must sneak past an angry chef and getting a golden ticket in the process. The stealth here is the only time it'll be utilized, but it's interesting to see something like that here. I will say, there is a boss fight with Scrooge in this game that immediately reminded me a bit of the final boss of Resident Evil 2. But don't get too excited because it's nowhere near as cool as that. There's also a scene where you control a train car in the North Pole, trying to avoid the cracks on the ground. This one was one of the more entertaining moments for me, honestly. There's even a sequence where you're driving in a tube in first-person view, and you'll need to hit the colored switches to open the path to advance. It really does try to incorporate varied moments within the game. But here is the thing. During my roughly 2-hour experience with this game from start to finish, there are quite a few issues I had with this game. First off, there is one scene where you are running on top of the train to catch up to the conductor to provide the young girl's missing golden ticket. The sequence of dodging oncoming obstacles is probably the most challenging part in this entire game, but was also a scene where I thought, dang, this is a kid's game and this is actually pretty rough. Even I got a bit frustrated due to how long the sequence was, and failing it brings you back to the very beginning. At the same token, it's probably the game's only exciting part, sadly. Another issue is that the game just lacks anything fun to do. You run on a train car for most of the game, doing a variety of mini games in between it all, but none of them are actually enjoyable. The rhythm sequences are dreadfully boring, the stealth sequence is just meh, and the combat never feels quite right, despite how simplified it is. The final game sequence has you flying the blimp of presents to the North Pole's town square where the Christmas tree is, and it's such an unexciting way to wrap up the game. Yes, this is part of the film, but there was nothing exciting happening gameplay-wise here. You can replay minigames based on how many coins you've collected in the game through the bonus content section of the main menu. Those minigames are from the core game itself, and they're now just endless score-a-thons. This would have been great if the minigames were actually any fun to play. The biggest issue is really just that the game is boring, and even for younger audiences. My daughter was watching me play this game, and she loves this movie. No joke, she's watched it at least 10 times in the last few weeks. At first, she was interested in watching me play this, and little by little, she was bored at just watching it and just wanted to rewatch the movie instead. In terms of visuals, the Polar Express looks pretty decent. While nothing looks amazing by any means, the texture work and character models do get the job done and are standard fare. The unlocked frame rate does stick close to the 60 frames per second mark a lot of the time, but there are definitely sequences where it dips to the 30 frames per second. Audio-wise, most of the voice cast returns for their roles here, except for the biggest, most important role, Tom Hanks. Well, again, his voice is there for the clips from the movie, and while the stand-in voice actor for him is actually his younger brother, Jim Hanks, and does a somewhat admirable job, but it still does pull you away from the experience a bit. I find it funny that they have to get his younger brother, but they can't just get Tom Hanks himself. The music is also not from the film, and the clips from the film even have the music changed, and they compose new music in place of it. And it just doesn't have the same effect. The score in the Polar Express film is quite good and memorable, but also matches the movie's tone properly. The music here fits well, but it lacks the staying power and will be forgotten once you turn the game off. Additionally, the audio balancing for cutscenes when characters speak and music plays is extremely poor. Most often the music plays over the voices, which was frustrating for me, especially being an audiophile. The Polar Express is a property that I never expected to have a video game based on it, but then again, I never expected a film on it back in the day, but the difference here is that the film is actually really enjoyable, whereas the game feels like an unfortunate cash grab. If you're a fan of the book or enjoyed the film, just stick to those formats. If your kids like the book and or movie, let them just stick to that, because what's here is one and done, honestly. It's not a bad game fundamentally, and it's far from broken by any means, but it fails to be anything more than a generic and forgettable cash grab of a movie licensed game. While the Polar Express story itself is really about capturing the essence of Christmas, this game sadly does not do that well.